Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Join the Dots, part of Salisbury Group and Herdify, massive welcome to today's webinar on data-driven marketing for charities in the era of budget cuts. So a couple of quick housekeeping things. The webinar today is being recorded. There's no file drills planned. We have got the Q&A function enabled today, so please do ask any questions as we go throughout. We've allowed for about 10 minutes, but should we overrun, we'll reply individually. And rather than just another webinar today, we'll be asking your opinion and thoughts throughout through various polling functions that we've enabled on the top navigation bar. And we'd love you to participate in this. So keep an eye out for those, and the first of which should be appearing right now. As I said, in today's webinar, we'll focus on how charities can make the most of limited resources by leveraging data-led strategies and innovative approaches such as behavioural science for audience targeting. And I'm delighted to welcome on screen Tom and Megan. If you would like to join the screen and say hello and introduce yourselves.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Yeah, I'm Tom, founder of Herdify. We are a software platform that uses behavioural science to build better performing audiences, and I'll talk more about that later. But for now, I'll pass you over to Megan.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm Megan. I'm a marketing manager in the donor acquisition team here at the RSPCA. So I'm the lead within our team for our integrated fundraising appeals. So I'll be touching a bit more as to how we're testing Herdify and kind of why we want to do that and future planning.
And I realised I didn't introduce myself right at the beginning. I'm Ben. I'm the managing partner of Join the Dots, co-host of today, and I will be talking about how we integrate behavioural science into our media planning later on. So today, Tom is going to kick us off with the first of three perspectives on the webinar, covering behavioural science and how this is playing a crucial role in media planning. So without further ado, I will hand over to Tom.
Right. Thanks, Ben. Let me just... Okay, so again, I'm going to start off with a quick poll. I don't think the polls pop up straight on screen, so you should be able to see a tab at the top for Slido or polls. And when I ask the question, that should come live. So this particular one's in polls. And really, I just wanted to get a temperature check for people on where are you on your behavioural science journey today. Okay, I'll take it back. This one pops up. So there you go. Just keen to get a litmus test to see, where we are on behavioural science today. So I will leave that up for a few seconds. So please do click, please do fill in. It just helps us understand where we are. I reckon that's probably enough. I think everyone's had enough time to do that. So once that process is, we'll try and we'll feedback where everyone is. If we don't do it in this, we'll make sure that in the post notes, we'll make sure that you see those numbers so you can understand how prevalent behavioural science is within the sector. So as I said in my intro, we use behavioural science to build better audiences. So I think it probably prompts the first question: why do we need to think about new audiences? You're all in market today, you're all thinking about audiences, you're all advertising. So why do we need to think differently about it? And to answer that, I want to tell you a story about a study that happened back in 2006, but it kind of gets repeated most years with the same outcome. But back in 2006, they wanted to understand why people purchased environmentally friendly products. And they gave them three options. Is it important to understand about how they perform for the environment? Is it important to understand how they perform financially? Or is it important to understand about the adoption of others around you, friends and family, and those types of things? And predictably, everyone's response was, tell me how it performs financially and tell me how it performs for my wallet. People weren't really interested in understanding about other people. They then ran the study. They split the tests into different groups, and different groups received different messages, and I'm sure you can guess where this is going. But overwhelmingly, the people that adopted the product were the people who heard about people around them using it, friends, family, people around them, which tells us two really interesting things. It shows some of the flaws in market research, because actually as consumers, as humans, We don't often know why we've made a decision. It's called post-rationalization. So that's kind of some of the flaws for market research. But more importantly, it tells us that our decisions are influenced by those around us. So when we come to thinking about new audiences, that becomes important because largely audiences over the last 50 years have just focused on individual attributes. It might have started with demographics, it's now individual behaviors, but largely it thinks about the individuals. Now, if we think about human decision making over the last hundreds of thousands of years, it's all been the same way. It's been about influence from those around us. The last 50 years with this deep dive on individuals is a gnat's wing in terms of evolutionary history. So the reason we need to think differently about audiences is because current audiences don't necessarily take into account how we make decisions. But why should we care about that, right? If we look at, so this is a chart here from the Charities Aid Foundation giving report from March this year, donations up. So, the number of pounds floating through the system is up. So why do we need to think differently? When you start thinking about the world as I do, as we do at Herdify in terms of collective behavior, we look at the data slightly differently. The same chart is showing us the number of donors is down. Okay, now this starts to become worrying, which I'll explain in a second. And this follows a long-term trend in the global generosity rankings for the UK. So there are less people in the UK giving, which is a concern from a social point of view, because if we think about copying, the less people who are giving, that means there are less people to copy, which means in subsequent years, there'll be less people giving, which means there'll be less people to copy. And we start this self-reinforcing cycle of decline. That's why I say, the more people that don't give to charity means the more people that don't give to charity. It's a reinforcing social norm. And what we're going to see, and some of you might be seeing this now, but these things will accelerate, is we're going to see these sorts of behaviors within our donor data. So we're going to see a decline in donations. Again, I'm not talking cash values, I'm talking about individual donors. And this is about the volume reduction and also, the volume of people who are giving regularly. These things are going to decline, or they're already declining. Acquisition costs are going to get harder. Little side note, I don't actually have an issue with rising acquisition costs. It's better to buy more expensive media if it gets you better customers. A 5% increase in acquisition, if it gives you a 50% increase in donations, is good. What I mean here is finding new donors is going to become harder. And then crucially, incubating new audiences is going to become harder. Okay, new audience, the seeds of new audiences, the collective behavior. If we're trying to reach 25-year-olds, for example, we need to find out where the 25-year-olds who are already donating are and where that kind of social influence exists. That becomes harder the less of them are to copy. Okay, so these are the problems we're going to face. So how can behavioral science help? And the great thing I love about behavioral science is pretty much any problem viewed through a behavioral science lens also offers you the solution. So I'm going to take you into a little bit of a technical deep dive, not that deep. I imagine it a technical like puddle dive really, but just to explain a bit more of the study and how these things work. So what I've got here is a very crude social network in the middle. We've got the person in the middle here is undecided, so they currently don't have a strong opinion, or they're not certainly donating. And then the people in red, from our point of view, are people who have the wrong social influence, and green are the people that we have the right social influence. So I've put RSPCA because we've got the lovely Megan on the call, and we work with the RSPCA. So this is how do we help RSPCA reach more people. I've just picked a random another animal charity to prove the point that there's competition within the sector. So if we take this individual in the middle, they are hearing about the Dogs Trust more than they're hearing about the RSPCA. I'll talk more in a minute about this, but when I say here, I don't mean people are running up to them excitedly going, I donate to Dogs Trust. It's the subtle signals, right? It's a door drop that's on the side, or a sticker in the back of a car, or a welcome pack, as well as conversation. Now, for the RSPCA to convert this person, it's going to be hard, okay, because actually they're being pulled and influenced more in another direction. It's not impossible, but even if they do, the chance of them staying converted is going to be much harder, effectively. All right, jumping ahead. We flip the scenario, okay, and we find pools of areas where they're green. So these people are kind of advocates, I say either conscious or subconscious. Sticker in a car shows you're an advocate, doesn't mean you're shouting it from the rooftops. These people are advocates of the RSPCA. So this audience is much more likely to, on the right, much more likely to convert to the RSPCA. Now, at some point, some will say, yeah, but we want to recruit all those red people too, right? And we know we do, so it's not about ignoring them. But the point is, if we get more people copying about the RSPCA, there are more people to copy from, and then eventually the audience on the left are being influenced by people around them, at which point it then makes more sense for the RSPCA to engage with them. Okay, so it's about timing, it's about following these pieces from a behavioural point of view, which helps us also start to understand why our campaigns underperform. So I've got this circle in the middle, which the blue circle indicates our target audience, and that might be, it's much more complicated, but I'll be very simple for this: animal lovers. Okay, if we then bring the copying into this, we need to bring that into the two sides. So on the left hand side, we've got a bunch of people who might fit the animal lovers badge, but if they're being influenced by if they're influenced towards another charity, then your media is going to be wasted. Worst case, it's wasted. It gets really worse in that it reminds them to go and donate elsewhere. Okay, so you're again eroding where your opportunity is. On the flip side, we have a bunch of people who might not fit. On the green here, we've got the green people inside the audience, animal lovers that influence towards us, great. But outside that, you've got a bunch of people who are being positively influenced. They just might not be marked as animal lovers in all these global databases, right? They're just being positively influenced. So there's a bunch of opportunity that we're not reaching, but they're primed for it. Just a quick point on referral and community. I touched on it briefly. People talk, they're like, are you just talking about word of mouth here, Tom? No, and this is really important. Word of mouth is really important. We know it's valuable, but actually what's more important is the influence of people around us. Okay, and then we call this social influence. Does not mean social media. This is in the real world. As I've mentioned, stickers in the back of the car. When I'm dropping the kids off at school, when I'm in the gym, in the coffee shop, you pick up on these conversations. These things are super powerful. What we're talking about here is how do we accelerate this social influence? It's not just me banging on about how good these offline real social networks are. This is the Charities Aid Foundation. Again, you can see second only to personal experience. People say they find charities through friends and family. Now back to my opening point, when I not very friendly to market research. I actually think this number is probably higher, but I think it still shows an indication that people believe that they find things out from their friends and family. Not going to deep dive on case studies today, but as an example, Comic Relief with Sport Relief, they started targeting these social communities to drive up participation and sign-ups for Sport Relief, and you can see they almost hit 200%. So this isn't in both. This isn't just an academic study. There's number of case studies across this, particularly with the well-known one like Comic Relief. So kind of coming full circle, really what we're saying here is when we identify these clusters, where you want to do is place your media on the right hand side. Now, if you've got unlimited budget, fine, hit everybody. But on the assumption that most of us have constraints, then let's place it on the areas where our social influence is high. So to wrap that up, before I go into my final section, really the whole summary of the last kind of 11 minutes by my clock is the human brain doesn't react to rational information, but it likes to copy, which creates herd mentality. This herd mentality creates audience clusters which are primed for advertising or marketing or events or pop-ups, whatever it might be, but they're invisible. Okay, there's always a kicker. And fundamentally, this introduces what Herdify do. So we effectively detect where these clusters of offline social influence exist for individual brands. Okay, so this isn't about let's find people who might donate to a charity. We want to find people who are most likely to engage with the RSPCA. Okay, so that's what Herdify do. Just to show you how that compares, so again, in that same Charities Aid Foundation report, there's data that shows where in the country people donate to charity. Okay, so this data is available. The problem is that's very sector specific. So, you can understand where they are, but so does everybody else. How this compares to what Herdify do is rather than just giving you the sector, charity donations as a whole, we find the postcode sectors with the highest future potential for your next campaign. And the reason that's in bold is think about your own behavior. It's not static, so you need to rerun this. You want to find these clusters each time you run a campaign. So that might be monthly for always on digital, or as you're doing different campaigns, you'd run this data differently for them. It's not just us, actually. I was very pleased when I read this report. I should say, even though I'm using this report a lot, we have had no input into it. We're not a sponsor, but actually one of their final recommendations is backing up exactly this. I've highlighted the core sections that says local connection is a powerful motivation for giving. And then the final piece, if you can encourage place-based giving and create a network of support, you're going to get good things to happen, which is really what Herdify is here to do. How do we do it? As I just kind of come into the last couple of minutes, we are a first-party data solution. We work with a number of charities in the UK, so this has been fully kind of GDPR vetted. We take first-party data. We don't want to know names or email addresses. We run that through our own AI system, which is our behavioral segmentation engine we affectionately called Be Seen. And then we have an output of location data. And this is where we work really closely with Ben and the team from Join the Dots, because they're experts at using our data and applying that into their audience mix. While behavior that I talk about is really important, media planning is much more complicated than just that. So we work very closely with those guys to get the best out of that. In 10 seconds, how do we do this? Because often, like, how can you predict where this stuff's happening? This is 15 years worth of research. I won't do it justice in 10 seconds, but fundamentally, it's the same modeling that you would use to predict a pandemic. And indeed, during the pandemic, we were building staff roster models for the government to reduce the chance of the virus spreading in critical infrastructure. You'll appreciate there's certain facilities in the UK we just can't shut down. If you can model the spread of a virus between two people, you can model the spread of an idea between people or influence, and that's really what we're doing. There's a bit more to it than that, but fundamentally, it's often the easiest way to get it across when you've got 10 seconds. Just a quick plug in terms of how it works. It's channel agnostic with a location. I won't go through all these numbers, but you can kind of see we get positive response across channels. We also have businesses using it outside media, but today we sort of focus heavily on media. And then to wrap it up, because I'm 20 seconds over, so I'm going to keep it short. I think the important thing to take away from here is when you start to understand and when you start to think about human behavior as a collective process of decision making, we look at the world slightly differently. So therefore, for me, I'm less interested in how much money is flowing through the system. I'm much more interested in how many people are flowing through the system. With that trend of a decline, we need to reverse that to stop damage to the sector. Now, charities that harness these social norms will benefit from both short-term and long-term growth. Short-term, we're going to get great campaign results. We're going to do all of the things that I've talked about here. But long-term, we're hopefully trying to reverse that generosity index in the UK and try and push that up. Okay, if you've been building community within that, then as that reverses, you will just have a bigger section of that community. And likewise, those that ignore it are therefore going to face stiffer headwinds because the people who've already built those communities, that social influence, those social norms, will have a much easier time. This isn't saying you have to use Herdify. You don't have to use Herdify to think about social norms. The call to action here is think about social norms in terms of your activation. Sure, we'd love to be involved, but it's just a concept of think about the consumer, think about the collective nature, and that's how we're going to get to success. That is the end of my section. So thank you for listening. As Ben said, we do have a Q&A function. If you've got questions now, drop them in while they're top of your head and we can get to them later. Other than that, I am going to pass over to you, Ben.
Brilliant, thanks, Tom. So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about how we at Join the Dots fuse behavioural science into our integrated channel planning to help you give more for less or give you more for less. But before that, it's time for another poll. So if you could, this one will be through Slido. So if you could just type in and we'll kind of run through this. What do you believe are the biggest challenges when acquiring new donors for your particular charities? We'd love to hear that. So my section, and Tom talked about the why and the how, or should I say cow, if for those of you that like a pun. We're gonna go through how we kind of integrate that with our media planning now. But first, a little bit about Join the Dots. So we are a vibrant, fiercely independent B Corp media agency that connects and simplifies data to drive sustainable growth for our clients in a creative way. And we do that through the way the business is structured. So we don't have any trade deals or any complex media P&L where our internal teams are set up by channel. And what that does is mean that we reduce any tension that comes in when we start working on a new client, and that lets data shine and take center stage, which for us gives us a real difference in our approach and really different results. And we've spent the last 20 years working across various brands, working with charities of all shapes and sizes, differentiating fundraising products and recruitment strategies, which gives us a very broad and wide perspective on the sector. But today we're going to focus on top tips on how to maximize the impact with tighter budget. And that covers everything through reducing wastage, through making your data work harder for you, improving media costs, and improving creative and production costs as well as part of that circle. So everything starts with the data, and your audience is key to that success, which enables us to create the most effective strategy to help you reach your objectives. And we know that every audience is multifaceted, which allows us to segment and customize, which drives response from those that are most likely to convert. And we at Join the Dots use a combination of different data sets that allow us to see a fuller picture, which then in turn helps inform the creative strategy so that the media and creative work in tandem to produce the best result. And what we've seen over the years is that the media and creative often work in adjacent, they have a push and pull effect, whereas we work very closely with all the creative partners we have on our roster to make that work even harder. And the benefits of that is that it reduces wastage, so your media spend works harder, and it also benefits the environment from a sustainability perspective. Now, within our group, we have a data and insight business called Wood for Trees, who've got a product called Insight Hub, which essentially compiles, visualizes, and democratizes industry-leading insights for charitable organisation. And that, as a base level, allows us to understand things like age, life stage, mosaic or acorn group, or household composition. But it's not enough to know who people are demographically. We use additional data sources to really understand more about the audience, as this example highlights. So these are two of the Join the Dots team members, Tanya and Claire, both of which are ABC1 women aged 40 plus. Tanya is a dog person, whereas Claire likes cats, and Tanya is a vegan, whereas Claire is a steak lover. And we can apply these learnings to both media and creative to ensure that we only target those people who are most likely to respond to our messaging, and therefore keeping wastage to a minimum. And as Tom's already talked about, Herdify data allows us to be even more precise with our targeting, identifying not just people who donate to a specific charity, but people who donate or will donate to your charity, more importantly. And this level of precision targeting ensures that we keep wastage to a minimum and help reduce our media and production costs. Now, data quality is becoming a non-negotiable and has done for a long time. And the age-old adage of rubbish in, rubbish out is now more relevant than it ever has been before. And good data hygiene ensures you're mailing the right people, provides cost savings, and ultimately protects your brand's reputation. And as a basis for those that are starting to dabble with using generative AI alongside traditional models, means having accessible, structured and clean data is absolutely critical when you're starting to look at that as well. So once we know we're using high quality data and precision targeting, we then use multiple negotiation strategies to make that budget stretch even further. And this could include things like new to TV deals where we can negotiate added value or free production, volume deals where we aggregate volume to reduce cost per thousands, or even things like taking advantage of Royal Mail incentives, such as incentives for new clients to channel, for growth and for testing. And this kind of negotiation maximizes cost efficiency and helps mitigate year-on-year price increases in things like Royal Mail rate card and the ever-increasing price of paper. And all too often, even with the best negotiation in the world, if you're using a high cost pack for your print, this will majorly impact the overall cost efficiency of your campaign. And there is a fine balance between having enough of an impactful format to drive response and the cost of that format. But a specialist print team will be able to make sure you're recommending the optimum format so that you're challenging. So please do make sure you're challenging your printers or agency to get the best value for money. And a recent example of this from our print team, who reviewed 2 client specs, were actually able to offer 2 cheaper formats, which have worked successfully for other clients in our portfolio, which has reduced the cost of production by about 80%. So this is another key factor when maximising the overall campaign value for you. And on to the first case study of today. So for KSS, we recommended an integrated approach that would be greater than the sum of its parts. And we launched KSS's most ambitious fundraising drive yet. And our campaign, Buy It for Life, had a simple yet powerful message, helping to buy a helicopter and save lives at the same time. And we utilised radio, door drops, press and inserts that all targeted Kent, Surrey and Sussex with precision, avoiding encroaching on other air ambulance territories. And this campaign reached its target in just 4 weeks, securing £1 million worth of donation. And today has been the most successful campaign in Kent, Surrey and Sussex's history. And further to this, in terms of what Tom was talking about earlier, what we also noticed, there was an unexpected outcome, the outpouring of emotional support for the charity by people giving their voice as well as a donation, with hundreds of people writing personal notes alongside their donation. And we were able to achieve this by adhering to the 3 approaches we've looked at: high quality data and precision targeting, cheap media, and cost efficient production. But don't just take our word for it. This is some very kind words from Simon Russell, who works at KSS, that's kind of advocating for us and our approach for this campaign. We've also partnered with Herdify to deliver mail campaigns for Abel and Cole, and this allowed us, by using Herdify's data, to identify where Abel and Cole communities had sprouted in the real world, the streets, towns and cities where communities' recommendation and word of mouth had the most influence. And as you'll see, the average mail response rate in areas with detected Abel and Cole brands were 164% higher than where they weren't, which resulted in the AOV being 18% higher in areas that Abel and Cole communities were detected as well. And just unpacking that a bit further, just to give you a kind of real world insight, what we were able to do was to look at testing this data in a structured way across 8 different data sets with a controlled test environment and the Herdify test environment. And as you'll see, and we looked at this across 4 different KPIs as well, the average uplift we were seeing from Herdify was about 2/3 greater than when on the control on its own, which gives us, using Herdify, genuinely gives you more for less and greater bang for your buck. But as we talked about, it's not just on the initial metrics, which I wanted to show. Using the Herdify model also drives longer term impact across all metrics, bringing loyal customers to continue to spend after the initial acquisition. So the yellow box on the right is the control region without Herdify data, and the data on the right, or on the blue box, is those KPIs. Apologies, probably a bit small for you to see, but we'll share this afterwards so you can have a look at it. But across every single metric we were using, the use of Herdify also drove lifetime value, which again is fantastic. So moving on from maximising impact with tighter budgets to then differentiating our messaging. Or in other words, how can we stand out from competitors are doing and reach new audiences? And again, we've got 3 top recommendations for this, which are all data-led. So let's dive into that in a bit more detail. So we use Nielsen Ad Intel to understand when charities in your sector are spending. And this is an example for some work we did with an animal charity, looking at where spends were lower across the course of the year, so that we can then deploy media spend to achieve greater cut through. And doing something differently when other charities are less active will help your charity stand out and let the message shout out louder. Another way we identify new audiences is looking at needs. So not just who the audience is and which media they consume, but why do they actually give? And if you can identify those needs and address their needs and address those needs rather, then the message is more likely to resonate. And this is an example of where we did some planning for the Salvation Army where we used a piece of research from the NFP Synergy to segment the audience by needs. And this data identified 3 key reasons why people give to the Salvation Army, which were their faith, they want to help those that are less fortunate at Christmas, and a belief that the government doesn't do enough. And we can then take that one step further and use those needs to identify moments of receptiveness and the media that will reach from most cost effectively in and for those moments. So for this example, key moments were Sundays before and after church, when they're doing their Christmas shopping and when they're learning about government plans on spending in the news. And we can therefore knew these best channels to reach in these moments, all of which then increase the response rate and also increase the average gift as well. And then finally, on to creativity, the third key element in differentiating your messaging. And as always, we start with the data. So here's how we've used an example of JICMail data, which showed men give mail from homeless charities twice the attention that females do, spending 84 seconds on average when compared to just 41 seconds from women. And this led to us testing a more male-focused creative, which increased the response rate as well. And then bringing the creative to life. And although we've talked about the importance of keeping the pack cost low, sometimes innovative creative can drive higher volumes in response and therefore impact the ROI as well. And this is a great example of a blank dummy we produced for KSS for their helicopter appeal, which unfortunately didn't happen. But you can see it would have been a very eye-catching creative and had greater standout on the coffee table and made them more likely to come back and respond at a later date. And even if we're running a more straightforward creative, we'll always put this through our eye tracking platform. And whilst this doesn't do the same job as a creative would, it provides a visual spell check to help us align our key messages and call to actions to make sure that they benefit from the consumer attention gaze. And really to sum up the importance of creativity, this is a real-life example from YMCA. So as well as a review of their media inserts, we worked to develop a new creative which we A/B tested to use for future campaigns. And this was a new creative. And if you look at it and firstly read from the top down until the point in white, what it then asks you to do is to read from the bottom up, which then tells a completely different story. So real innovation in the market, from using the same copy and content, just reversing the flow of it tells a completely different story and drives different engagement. And I can't finish without touching on sustainability. And as a business, we care deeply about this, and everything we've talked about so far links back to a more sustainable approach to media planning. And we're delighted to be a B Corp media agency. But it's not just about us, it's your donors, which this research from Yonder Consulting shows that your donors also care deeply about this. And this validates the theory that it's much better to use precision targeting and be sustainable in your media and production choices than it is to just go for a volume strategy, which would incur budget and environmental wastage. So that is it from me today. I hope everyone found that useful. If I can now welcome Megan on screen for the final session before we get to the Q&A. And I will now hand over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Ben. So, wonderful. Lovely. So just a quick introductory slide really to start me off. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, my role centres around our 2 major integrated fundraising appeals each year. So the first we run in summer and the other throughout winter. So for today's session, I'll probably just be referencing more specifically our print campaigns that we run as part of our acquisition activity for winter. Because excitingly, this year, we are testing Herdify for the first time on our door drop campaign. So we're conducting a split test at this stage, really to kind of determine how the data impacts performance. So looking both inside and outside those Herdify community areas, so we have that comparison. But at its core, I suppose this initial test is really essentially, aiming to explore whether identifying and targeting those high influence communities will uplift our marketing results. So will we see higher response rates, overall stronger campaign performance, for example. And I know, like Ben and Tom have touched on, and I'll touch on it a little bit later, it is really important to call out that it isn't just those short-term metrics that deem success. It is very much about that long-term value as well. are we driving and recruiting more of those sticky supporters, you know, the ones that do stick around with us, they're more loyal, they engage more frequently with us in future, you know, or perhaps on the other side, you know, it's also about how we can evolve our creative approach. You know, how can we really better connect with those valuable communities? I don't want to get too excited or jinx it, especially as our door drop has only been live for a few weeks now, but the results we're seeing are really promising so far. So we are seeing the test segment for Herdify already outperforming our control group. So we're seeing over double the responses received from the test already. So Tom, you'll be pleased to hear. It's really great to see, and I hope, obviously, fingers crossed, that trend continues throughout the campaign. So we'll be keeping a close eye on it. But beyond those sort of immediate outcomes, we're really just kind of keen to explore how we can continue testing these new approaches with Herdify. It's really more about understanding how we can effectively resonate with our audiences, you know, maximize that support, you know, uncover these untapped opportunities that we've not had before. I'm aware I probably sound a bit like a sales rep for Herdify. Tom is not paying me, I promise, but it's more just my excitement about how we can test, we can learn, we can grow our campaigns, which, you know, here at the RSPCA, we're really passionate about that we really champion that approach in our marketing, you know, that ethos that we only learn what works, you know, and we only grow if we learn what doesn't work. So next one, lovely. So I suppose why Herdify? Because, you know, at its simplest, it does allow us to uncover these previously untapped audiences, you know, identifying those key community pockets that, you know, that where we have overlaid our first party data over, we can see that they share these similarities with our best and our most loyal supporters, but that they haven't been part of our reach before. I think probably a lot of us can relate. Sometimes we become fixated on the supporters that we know will give in response to our campaigns. We can track their responses, you know, we can see that income, we can delve into the analytics of every donation, every purchase, you know, whatever we want to call them. But Herdify almost allows us to kind of take that step back and think about the people that perhaps don't respond directly with a monetary gift, but, you know, pass the material on to their friends and family. You know, I think when you think about it this way, that of course there's value in that. If I'm thinking about our door drop, for example, you know, we send that to our target audience, you know, perhaps that's an elderly lady, let's call her Mary, you know, she receives our door drop, you know, she may or may not donate, but she decides that her daughter, you know, her daughter has a dog, she's an animal lover, you know, she thinks that she'd connect with the case study that's in our pack, you know, she passes that on to her daughter. Maybe her daughter donates, maybe she doesn't, but, you know, that pack's around in the house, you know, it's maybe she passes it on to friends. There's hundreds of scenarios that can happen, but I think in the end, you know, our door drop is still being engaged with, it's sparking these conversations, it's sparking these actions. So I think it's really important to try and remember the additional reach, the additional coverage that you may be receiving that, you know, I'm not sure about anyone else, but it's near enough impossible to track on any of our traditional, you know, CRMs in our database system. So hopefully the more that we can explore Herdify's tool, the better that we can understand these communities, we can kind of gauge what behaviors and what preferences drive these conversations, drive these actions, and really explore, you know, once we do know what those motivators are, how we can overlay those on top of our existing audience models, really help refine and optimize our targeting. I'm probably getting a bit ahead of myself at this stage, but, you know, I'm thinking ahead, you know, I've already got so many thoughts flying around in my brain as to how we can really evolve our messaging to become more personalized, to become more regionalized towards those specific communities. You know, for us at the RSPCA, I'm sure for the majority of us marketers here, it's really important to create those strong, robust, emotional connections with our audience. It's tapping into, you know, their local identity and their lifestyle. And, you know, theoretically, that should, you know, from the results that Ben and Tom have shown, it's heightening their engagement and, you know, their association with your brand, and, you know, hopefully increase the propensity for them to engage, you know, with you, with us in future. And I think by tying that sort of, you know, refined targeting and your hyper relevant, you know, creative together, yes, you know, it increases the possibility of these short term, you know, higher response rates, for example, better engagement on the off front, but on a par, it's nurturing these longer term relationships. And the more positive that initial response, initial reaction with your brand, the more likely, you know, that's going to pay dividends for the potential future interactions that they'll have with you. So I just wanted to provide some context, I suppose, on the last few years of our winter appeal print campaigns. I've touched on why we wanted to test Herdify this year, but I think just quickly showing, the evolution of our campaigns will provide a bit of background. So looking back to 2022, you can see our channel mix consisted, of only door drop, but over time we've tested various print channels. I think it was back in 2021, so just a little bit before I joined. We tested direct mail, we tested partially addressed mail as well. We've since refined our focus, based on the historical performance that we've been seeing. We've kind of really begun to narrow down to our top performing, most efficient print channels, which, as you can see, are door drop and inserts, where we've run those over the past couple of years. So now it's really a case of further optimizing those best performing channels. We know they work, but how can we get them to work even better? We always set the challenge of beating results year on year, but especially with the challenges that we're seeing in the current landscape that Ben pointed out, and more notably these rising costs that we're seeing, it is even more vital that we do plan and we develop these most cost-effective print campaigns. And I think, like Ben mentioned, making that data work even harder for us is a really key part in achieving that. But what's been consistent throughout the years is our commitment to testing and learning. So like I said, we're really fortunate. RSPCA really champions that approach. And, it's not just about fine-tuning the targeting, but the creative approach, the channels that we use and testing those on small volumes before we scale them up. And, it's not just rolling it out en masse. It's kind of really, really refining what works best for our different audiences, what we know drives value, what resonates most with our core fundraising audiences. And again, remembering that long-term value and return, not just that immediate impact. So I know I mentioned earlier some of the ideas that we are already having around how we can really harness the Herdify data, maximize that impact amongst the communities, really connect with their local identities. Regionalisation isn't entirely new to us, but in the past, our approach has been limited. I think, like I imagine we all are, we're beholden with the data that we have available to us. So, previously our approach is, identifying some key regions using historical donation data, making adjustments and calling out those areas in our pack. I popped a couple of screenshots on there that you can see. We referenced this area on our outer envelope. So the Surrey mentioned there, and again, like a localized stat in the letter, sort of calling out how many people last year, sort of donated and engaged with us in our campaign. Unfortunately, it didn't quite yield the results that we wanted, but with Herdify's insights, now we have that opportunity to really kind of in the future further explore regionalisation on a much more granular level. It's very much, I'm thinking storytelling, but tailored not just to the wider region, but to that local area, that direct community. How can we show potential supporters the tangible impact of their support, in their local area? I know I keep banging on about it, but forging these deeper connections with our audience, seeing them as a person, not just a transaction. I think we really need to understand, their values, their beliefs. If we can, call out on those, if we can align with those, we make those really memorable, meaningful impressions, and beginning to learn what motivates these people. What's motivating them to engage and take an action, whether that's financial upfront or this stronger, longer term association and favor of your brand and aligning with your values as an organization. And of course, I think it goes without saying that we must recognize that broader influence of word of mouth, but also, like Tom said, it's that social influence as well. What can that play a part in your campaigns? Someone doesn't directly respond to our door drop, for example, but it sparks these conversations, it triggers these actions elsewhere, especially as part of our wider integrated appeals. There's plenty of other activity running alongside our print campaigns. So perhaps it's just that initial exposure to the door drop, that they may donate, they might not, but perhaps where they've seen that, they might later then click on a Facebook ad of ours, or engage in an email or respond to a DRTV ad. So I think it's important where we can to try and look at results holistically, take into account all of the channels that you run as part of a campaign or an integrated appeal. Can we identify uplifts and trends across other activity perhaps? And I know it is sometimes easier said than done, but it's kind of that great way to see whether there has been any wider impact amongst your other campaigns. I'm conscious of a little bit of time, but I think just to wrap up really, I'm really hoping that the test this year with Herdify is just the beginning of really learning how we can refine our targeting. Once we identify those communities, understand that it works in our data and our performance, it's exploring how we can go even further, maximize that impact, understanding how we can identify those behaviors of the different communities, how those behaviors drive the action amongst them. And, people, I believe when people see their own values reflected in your brand, it not only allows that sort of initial emotional connection to form, it almost like inspires them. I think it was Ben that said almost like advocates for your brand. And, I'm thinking, that's free reach, it's free coverage, right, amongst these areas. It is very much about how we can inspire them to, want to be part of your brand, essentially part of your movement, part of your cause. Of course, mustn't overlook the potential long-term impact. I know I've said that a few times, but not just the word of mouth, but the social influence as well, especially on building, this sustainable, this trusted brand presence, which I know for our supporters is a really big motivator to give. If they trust your message, they trust your cause, they are more likely to engage with you. And we all know that people value the opinion and recommendations of other. Obviously, Herdify wouldn't be here if that wasn't the case. So I think it's just I'm really looking forward basically to seeing where the approach takes us and how we can really sort of learn to refine our targeting moving forward. But thanks for listening. I think I'm going to hand back to Ben now for questions.
Well, thanks, Megan. If you can stay on screen, and if Tom, if you can also come back through, that'd be great. We've had a couple of questions come in. If I just flick forward one. So, Tom, probably a question for you to start with. So you said that Herdify is a channel agnostic tool. Can it be used for face-to-face activity?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't name the charity because we don't have the case study in place that we can talk about, but we did some work exactly on that on their face-to-face door knocking activity. So I'm sure it's a channel that many of you will use, but with all the principles that we've talked about and a lot exactly that Megan touched on as well, rather than send these people to houses who are less likely to respond, let's get these people knocking on doors where there's a much higher chance. So I can't share exact numbers, but yeah, significant uplifts around some of the numbers that I showed earlier from that face-to-face door knocking activity as well. So yeah, absolutely, Ben.
Brilliant, cool. And Megan, probably one for you and for me. Where do you see and where do your agencies see Herdify fitting into what the traditional media planning schedule would be? But if you want to take that first, and I can add to that after.
Yeah, of course. In terms of when we would sort of look to introduce that into our campaigns.
Yeah.
So I think where we've got our sort of existing audience models, now we've built them up, but that we know they work. It's very much a case of, I think, where obviously Herdify, we can overlay that data, on top of Herdify. I think a bit like Tom said earlier in his slides, right, is planning for the next campaign. So for me, it is very much as soon as we start planning media, we should start thinking about how we can really sort of overlay this Herdify stuff and really sort of boost what we already know. I think for us, it's very much, media is a very complex beast, and it isn't just print, obviously, that we do run as part of our integrated appeals. And I know, obviously, I have been talking about print exclusively, but we run digital all the time. We like Tom said, we have always on digital. So we know that those sorts of learnings and tools can be applied to other channels as well. So whilst at the moment it is more just exclusively print and we're testing it, I think it should be included, and it should be thought about in all of our campaigns. So maybe thinking a bit far ahead in the future, but if this test works on print, then who's to say we can't start to think about every month sort of refreshing the data and thinking about how it can work across a whole host of our channels, really. So I would say from the get-go, really, ideally.
Yeah, I think that's really, I wouldn't add too much more to that. I think the only other example I've got that springs to mind is the work we've done with Able and Cole, in that we've got the confidence in the Herdify data effectively allows us to target more efficiently and effectively with door drop and direct mail, to name a couple of channels, and they do use it on digital channels as well. But what that's then allowed us to do, particularly from a direct mail perspective, is to effectively deselect postcodes that don't fit into the communities that we're targeting. which is really interesting because, again, from a sustainable and environmental perspective, it ticks that box because we're not having to produce as much or use as much paper in our marketing, but also we know that the value that Herdify is delivering in terms of uplift genuinely allows us to do more with less, which is phenomenal. If you extrapolate that across all of the channels, it just becomes much more efficient, which is great. And then Tom, a final one, or there's a couple more that have come in for you. Can Herdify be used on existing donor communications as well as acquisition?
By existing donor communications, sorry, taking me a second to catch up. Yeah, it can. So I think it's always dangerous to give yes or no answers when we're talking about kind of the nuances with consumer behavior or human behavior. If they're super active already, then it's probably not going to add that much value to it. But actually, it might be. And again, this varies on people's definition of existing donor, but people who might be classed as existing donor, but may be starting to fall into a lapse period, you're going to have a much higher chance of re-recruiting those people. And we've worked across a number of subscription boxes outside Abel & Cole with exactly that, like lapsed customers. They're technically active, they maybe haven't ordered for 3 months, so they're still existing, but actually you get much higher rates. So I think, and a bit really what Megan was talking about, I think it allows you to break up what is today an existing customer segment into much more subtle nuances and treat that communication differently. Your super hot warm ones, we don't want to mess with them, but how can we get more from the segments within that don't perform as well? So yeah, it's really about all up audience essentially.
Brilliant, cool, thank you. And then one that's just come in from the Q&A. I think again, Tom, this one is for you. So as well as bringing in fundraising data and then looking at the spread of influence, are there any examples of charities, organisations overlaying their operational or service users data in further helping you to fine tune your targeting?
No, but not within the charity sector. But yes, there's, again, I can't mention the company because it's a kind of work in progress project, but actually we're looking at where they can deploy physical infrastructure within their business, because actually they have a physical infrastructure has an enormous build cost, but also has an operational cost which they need to drive efficiency from. So actually by overlaying where communities are, aka where's future demand, that's really what we're talking about here, right? Let's align any infrastructure investments with future demand, and therefore that allows you to use this. That still forms part of what marketing are doing, but it actually starts to bring marketing into a strategic conversation in the business. It says, look, this isn't about just an audience that's going to help us, bring in money. This is about an audience that's going to help us grow our business strategically. So haven't done any of that in the charity sector yet. We'd love to start doing that. We sort of don't want to confuse people too much. We keep our message quite niche, but actually in other sectors where people are now getting much more comfortable and familiar with the data, it's sort of being brought up to that more strategic level across the business about, anything that has a geography, let's bring it into the conversation.
Brilliant, thank you. And then final question just before we wrap up. So can Herdify integrate with other segmentation tools, and what, in your opinion, sets Herdify apart from other forms of segmentation?
Yeah, the core way we look at it is category specific or brand specific. So, Ben, you talked a lot of the other data sets. We've got TGI, we've got Experian and CACI and all these other ones out there. And these are great at finding category insights. Like, it's really important. We want to find people who are interested in looking after animals, right? We want to find people who are interested in giving to homeless charities. And that's really broad. But as per my example, within that, you're going to find competing categories. So we help find those brand specific, those charity specific insights. It's not an either or. So it's not what's gone before is wrong. It's about an overlap. So, as Ben already talked about, he uses and his team, they use all of the other data sets on top of ours. So it's a combination. So it's not about replacing it. It's about optimization. And the whole theme of this webinar is more for less. This is about how do we optimize and find, let's not just go after the whole audience that could give to us. Let's find the audience have the best chance of giving to us. And really, that's why we play well all the other segmentations, because we combine what they do with category with what we do at an individual brand or charity level.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So we've got 5 minutes left now. I just want to wrap up with a couple of kind of key themes for the section. So Tom, you talked earlier about the kind of need to reverse the social norms around charitable giving, and those brands that kind of harness those social norms will continue to kind of thrive, really. And then Megan, you've talked very heavily about kind of the need to understand your audiences. And again, you made a really good point around when individuals see their own values reflected in the material, which strengthens that connection and then inspires them to become an advocate themselves, which is amazing. And again, the need to think holistically. So I think a lot of what we see as an agency is that there's still this need to look at the short-term KPI and that long tail often gets forgotten about in the first for kind of quick wins. We often forget about that, and then the benefit that the kind of word of mouth has on that longer term strategy as well. And then for me, I think the key messages I'd like to leave the audience with is good data is the foundation to any good customer acquisition or retention strategy, and it's becoming more and more important to get that right as an absolute kind of fundamental building block pillar. And the final one is value over volume. So there is a fine art between getting the balance right between using reach and frequency, but working in a smarter way, harnessing your data that can deliver the better bang for your buck from a income generation perspective, but also then has sustainability benefits that come with that. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today, and we're just going to put a couple of final polls up. I would like to thank Tom and Megan for speaking today. They're incredible insights, so thank you very much. I would also like to thank our marketing team, so massive thank you to Naomi, Lizzie and Dom, and also to Lottie Buckley for her help with the webinar today. Massive thank you to Charles as well from the Herdify marketing team. And finally, I'd like to thank every one of you that joined the webinar, those live and also watching back. We hope you found it really, really interesting. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. A copy of the recording and slides will be sent along through email. Finally, just wish you have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for attending.